Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Jessica with Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast, and our guest today is...
Hello, I'm Kate Weinberg from the UK. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm really pleased to be talking to you. I'm a novelist, and my debut, The Truants, actually is launched today in the United States. So it's a particular pleasure to be talking to you today.
So that's January 26th in the United States. Has the book launched in the UK yet?
Yes, it did. It launched. It's already launched in paperback in the UK, actually. Hardback months before then, yes. So.
Oh, very nice. Well, welcome to the other side of the pond, publishing-wise.
Yeah, we're in the unusual position. Normally the UK lags behind the US, so it feels odd.
It's funny you say that, because for the most part, that's what we've been hearing the last few weeks from different authors. You know, it's about to launch in the UK, so it's fun to have the opposite this time. So enough of the preamble. Tell us a little bit about this book, The Truants.
Okay, so The Truants is, as I said, it's my first novel. It's been described variously as a coming-of-age drama and a murder mystery and a suspense and a literary thriller. And actually, I didn't write it into a particular genre. What I was trying to do was, also and a campus mystery. And what I was trying to do was just balance out the story and the characters in a way that I love when I'm reading. Sometimes I find that books are either, they tend to be weighted one way or the other. They're very character-led or they're very story-led. And I was constantly trying to rebalance the two so that if I turn the volume up on the characters, I didn't lose the story and vice versa.
It was an interesting balance. It was, while I was reading it, a lot of times I almost felt like I was watching it like an old movie, but it's actually a bit more of a current story. Agatha Christie comes up a lot in this book. Are you, obviously you're a fan of her narrative and her life, or are you not, and you're throwing us off for a loop?
No, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Agatha's, and her books, one of her murder mysteries was the first book I really remember reading, as opposed to having a book read to me. So, and I've always loved her, and I love murder mysteries, and I love that feeling of cracking the plot and being sort of sent off on wild goose chases and off on red herrings. But actually, as I was constructing this story and delving into her life, I realized a couple of things. That actually the mystery in her own life was the thing that I found even more intriguing than these clever plots she had made up. This unexplained disappearance that she had for 11 days in her life, which any Agatha Christie fan will probably know about. But I followed it sort of deep into her psychology a bit, and I let it underpin sort of some of the seminars that happen in the book. But in particular, I wanted one of my characters, Lana, who's the teacher, the sort of professor, who's the linchpin of the plot, to somehow be reflecting different bits of Agatha Christie in this sort of disappearing act she pulled in her own life.
Yeah, so there was it was very thick with atmosphere, the story in general, which I think is what led to it having that sort of old-timey feel in a modern setting, and it was very cool. Lorna is, as you said, she's the linchpin. She's pretty much the eye of the storm, one can say. Everything sort of circles around her and is drawn in. When we first hear about her, the protagonist, Jess, is enamored with the idea of getting to study with Lorna. And through that, she becomes sort of connected with the other three younger characters in the story. Where did, other than Agatha Christie having, and the mystery in her life, where did Lorna herself come from?
So, well, it's funny you should ask me that, because in a way, this book started forming itself 15 years before I started writing it, because I was that student too. I was the Jess Walker narrator character who arrived at a university in the UK. In this case, it was the University of East Anglia, which has this famous creative writing course. So I took a little bit of a detour and put it into English literature. And I was incredibly struck by one of the teachers there, this very famous literary critic called Lana Sage, who some of your listeners may know about. She was a fabulous, irreverent, rule-breaking academic and brilliant storyteller. And she really, I'd been to Oxford as an undergraduate, and she just sort of shook all the dust out of my thinking and my learning, and sort of rewired me intellectually. And I was very lit up by that experience. And shortly after I left the course, she actually died. She had emphysema, very sadly. And I was very cut up. I remember being very cut up at her memorial. And one of the students on the creative writing course turned to me and said, "You know what, I think you're going to write about her one day." And it took me a long time to sit down and reshape that story into something very different. I pushed the Lorna character into very different, sort of deeper, darker corners. But
definitely.
But the inspiration, that feeling of reverence and excitement, and that sort of rebirth that can happen when you really connect to a teacher, that all came from the real Lana Sage.
That is fascinating. And I have to say, I did see Lorna Sage in your acknowledgments at the end. So thank you so much for adding just that personal voice to it. So you also have the three younger characters. There's Georgie, who comes from a wealthy family, and she's got her own issues. There's Nick, who is such a nice guy. I don't know what else to say about him. He really is, he's so good at heart and really seems to actually have the best interest of other people in his mind. Whereas some of the other characters might not. They might only have their own interests. And then there's Alec, he's a little bit older than Georgie and Jess and
right. Yeah.
Nick himself.
He's a postgraduate student. Exactly.
Yes. So he's a journalist in exile from South Africa, and he himself is very mysterious and pulls some disappearing acts as well. What drove you to create him? Because in a way, he creates a lot of, I guess, thorns for the friends themselves.
Yeah, he's this sort of without wanting to.
Yeah, that's why I was having trouble figuring out the word for him, because I'm thinking, depending on what I say and how I phrase this, it could just give too much away.
It's a tricky line to tread when you're talking about the story. But yeah, he's a complex character, and I had in many ways the most difficulty developing Alec out of all the characters. And I kind of knew what character I was aiming for. I had a clear, sort of very tangled web in my mind of how all the characters crossed over and tripped each other up and ended up having unexpected effects on each other. But I really struggled with him in a way that I hadn't struggled with the rest of my cast, who are mainly female, apart from Nick, who's a bit of a supporting character. And my husband read an early draft of my book, and he came to me and he said, "Look, I love this story, but you know what, I don't think you're so interested in men. You're so much more interested in women than you are in men, and you've got to do some work on your male characters. And I reread it and thought, yeah, he's totally right. I find thinking my way into the complexity of the female psyche more natural. You know, obviously I'm a woman, but also I just go that little bit further. And I thought, what am I going to do about this? And in the end, I hit upon a bit of a ruse, which is I picked a female that I knew, and I based my Alec character very heavily on her. And I went back to developing him, and I infused him with all the complexity of her psyche. And suddenly he came to life for me. So I don't know whether this is something, a kind of cross-dressing kind of creation thing that I'm going to need to do in the future, but it certainly worked for Alec.
Well, I think that it worked for him very well, and I didn't get that at all.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say anymore because I really just I don't want to spoil the, unwrap him too much. So the name of the novel, The Truants,
Mm-hmm.
comes up in the book as a book that Lorna herself had written.
Right.
So did you have trouble naming this book? And tell us a little bit about fictional Lorna's book.
Okay, fictional Lorna. So the professor in the book, who's this sort of maverick professor who draws all the students around her, and like I said, reflects the real life Lorna. Jess has come to this university to study under her because she's written this, what Jess thinks of as a manifesto for a kind of extraordinary life. It's all about writers who break the rules. She's written about all these writers in history who are in some ways truants, rule breakers who are never where they're supposed to be. And she creates this argument, which is to make good art, to really go there in your writing, you can't live this conformist life. You've got to go outside the lines. And so truancy is at the heart of kind of all the different themes in the book. But the funny thing is whereas at the beginning of the writing process, I was really playing with the idea of rule breaking, as I've just said, as the story developed, I realized that there was a different kind of truancy going on as well. This truancy of really disappearing in your own lives, of becoming emotionally absent, of not being exactly who you purported to be. So it felt like this crossover between, I guess, the story element and the kind of emotional arc of the plot. It was kind of this sweet spot in the middle, and I thought that's what they are. They're all in different ways truants.
I think that the whole idea of emotional truancy was absolutely there. And I thought that I always thought that it was interesting that you have this book within a book, but then the meaning is different for the overall plot of your novel. And I also thought it was interesting that Jess was in love with the idea of being a rule breaker, but really up until that point, she basically lived a very normal life. She had the normal heartbreaks of a teenager, and the normal life with siblings, given a few issues here and there, but who doesn't in a family. And she really had just like a monument in her mind to, as you had said, this extraordinary life and being the kind of truant that was originally spoken about.
Yeah, so that's beautifully put. And I guess I wanted to very much have that as the sort of driving force behind Jess. Jess's sort of fatal flaw, if you like, is that she thinks that at all costs she must get away from this ordinary life and version of herself. She's never enjoyed herself. She's never thought that she was one of those people that was memorable or would create an impression on life in any way. So she arrives on a mission for self-reinvention. And of course, the flip side to that, you know, she's very young. She's sort of turning 18, turning 19. And I think it's a stage I certainly, you know, remember feeling that way, where you lose your sense of perspective about the importance of, I suppose, yourself in the big scheme of things. And she's so intent on being unusual, and she's so intent on sort of being original that she makes a huge amount of mistakes, and the rule breaking comes at great cost to others and eventually to herself.
Yeah, I think that the thing about the time period in Jess's life in which it's set, that period where you're a freshman in college, is for so many who go away to college or university, depending on where you live and what you call it, there's so many people who want to reinvent themselves and think that maybe their life prior to being there is inadequate. And I think that's part of the growing process. I don't want to say that they're wrong in trying to do it, because they have their reasons for wanting to, but some people make a lot of mistakes. Some people grow from those mistakes, and some people, unfortunately,
they can't roll back on. Yeah,
exactly, that you can't roll back. Now, for the most part, most people make those mistakes that they realize, 10 years later, 5 years later, even they graduated, they're like, oh, what was I thinking? Some people try on different groups of friends like they're trying on clothes to kind of see what reflects better in themselves. But I think for Jess, she's got this image so set in her mind that when she goes and she makes those mistakes, she thinks she's doing the right thing. She does not realize that she's making mistakes.
Right. So it's exactly right. And it's this this uncomfortable balance, which I think is very, again, it comes, some people never shrug that off, but I think it is very particular at that kind of stage of development, which is, at all costs be true to yourself, at all costs follow your heart. What I tried to explore was the dark side of that, the cost of these so-called romantic ideas and ideals in the name of sort of, whether it's great art or great love or sort of feeling very alive. What sort of lurks in the shadow of those choices?
So what are some of your favorite coming of age stories, and I guess collegiate type stories?
Right. So I've always loved the campus style story, and that a few reviewers have mentioned it was easy to see that I'd spent quite a lot of time with The Secret History when I was in my sort of the stage where the narrator is at.
People have compared it to a spiritual sister or a cousin to The Secret History.
So which I'm enormously flattered by, and I thought that book was very, very well balanced. There are a kind of cross section of campus stories that I've really liked, from very old classics like Brideshead Revisited and E.M. Forster's The Longest Journey, which is probably his least known novel, to I recently read Brandon Taylor's Real Life, which was fantastic, and ML Rio's If We Were Villains. So I kind of like the campus mystery in whatever guise it turns on. I particularly have a softness for it if there is a sort of murder or dark element in it. But the kind of coming of age drama seems to me to sync up beautifully with a murder mystery, because when you're coming of age, things are not always as they seem. And in a murder mystery, things are certainly not always as they seem. So there's this sense of trying to peel away the different disguises that people put on, including oneself. And with Jess, I really wanted, entirely as you said, I really wanted her to be going through that process where she didn't necessarily end up a better person, but certainly a wiser person for what she went through. And that's sort of that's the currency of coming of age. And it's often books that I find give me an enormous amount, because I like reading about change. I like that feeling of vicariously going through an epiphany or a change that will kind of cause me to look at life afresh.
I want to talk a little bit about Jess's relationship with Georgie, her best friend, who, and this, it's not giving anything away to say that Jess has an infatuation with Alec, who is Georgie's boyfriend.
Right.
Because she says it immediately that she has she has two infatuations. She has one with Alec, and she also has one with Lorna. I think there's a lot of exploration of female friendships that need to be looked at as to the impact of this ideal that the romantic relationship is the most important thing.
Right.
And I think that a lot, for years and years, the female friendship was seen as almost like a needed collateral.
Yes.
This is just how it is. And I think I got the sense that you wanted to show that as a negative, that it's just collateral. If I go after my friend's boyfriend, whatever. I think there was like a real affection for Georgie towards Jess, and a real need for having a Jess in her life.
Exactly. And I really wanted to almost kind of create a sort of optical illusion as I was writing the book, which is your attention is on what you think of as the kind of romantic kind of center of the book. But actually, like a lot of young people, you're focusing on the wrong thing. You're dazzled, or you're caught up in, the emotional intensity of whatever drama of the heart is playing out, and friendships can get sort of lost and betrayed in that. So that was a very important part of what I thought of as the coming of age element to it, was when that problem of, in quotes unquote, following your heart becomes a problem for your value system and your all the sort of massive ripple effects that making some of those choices have. So yeah, very much I wanted to create a very complex sisterhood in this book.
Circling back to the idea of an obsession with a professor, I was somewhat reminded of this old movie called The Paper Chase, where
I haven't seen that.
So it's about a first-year law student at Harvard, and he becomes obsessed with this professor to the point, and at one point he begins dating the professor's daughter, and like he's talking to her about her father while they're together. And I remember being like, oh my gosh, if I was her, I'd be like, please just stop. But it was like, it's such a 70s movie. I mean, like, I'm thinking about mutton chops now while I'm I'm picturing the mutton chops in my head while I'm talking to you. But the idea of somebody just really being drawn in and almost taken in by this cult of personality, it sort of drew me to the whole idea of Lorna. And I think you really you really had her as both, this mystery, this beacon, and also this black hole.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. I think a lot of it comes down to, what I suppose is kind of a bit of a buzzword in psychology, but is boundaries, and how at that stage in your life that Jess is at, but for Lana throughout her life, and so many people I know maintain that they don't grow out of it, which is this sort of porous boundary around them. They're so they're often larger than life characters, and they don't know when to stop. And they're glorious characters to write about, because often they shine very brightly and they have a huge impact on other characters' lives, and you wouldn't want everyone to be kind of boundaried and conformist and balanced in your own world, but approach with caution. Something you will get hurt.
Sure. I think especially within the college period and grad school period, there's a lot of boundaries that get blurred between professors and students and grad students and thesis students. And sometimes it's something, that like can move into a friendship or something, and sometimes it just becomes plain toxic. And
right. Yeah, both ways, doesn't it? It's you think of it from the point of view, and certainly in literature it's often the student towards the professor, and what I tried to kind of unpack was the student. You're halfway into the book before you think, well, what's in Lana's mind? So you looking down the other end of the sort of microscope, I guess, and flipping the focus. I don't know, did you have one of those intense relationships either at college or?
I didn't. Okay. I know that they existed.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think they are, there's a lot of darkness that surrounds the kind of blur between ego and authority, I guess, that sort of crossover. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Although I will say that I did have a professor who was a very good mentor in the way that he absolutely kept his boundaries, but he was a very good professor. And I do think a lot just about how he maintained such a nice balance of really, like mentoring his students, making time for them, but also being like, and now is the time for my family, and that's it. So yeah,
as well, the Lana Sage, the real Lana Sage in my life, was not a sort of boundaryless person at all, but so it wasn't that I was taking as inspiration, but it was that magic that made you want to follow her.
Well, thank you so much. Once again, this was Jessica and
Kate Weinberg from the UK.
And we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.